Great. So welcome everyone to our webinar, Serving Victims of Crime, Elder Justice Funding and Delivery Models. This is part of our Serving Victims of Crime series, in which we will be talking about different service delivery models as well as funding that can support legal services as they work to serve victims of crimes. Other webinars in this series will be on foster care and domestic violence. Those are forthcoming, so stay tuned. Today's presenter, so my name is Casey Chiapetta. I work with NLADA on the civil legal team. We also have Jessica Brock from Indiana Legal Services, who is a staff attorney on their LAVA project. We have Karen Buck from SeniorLAW Center. She's the executive director, and that's based in Pennsylvania. We have Hillary Dalen, who works for HHS ACL, and she will be our first presenter on this. And then we also have Leslie Powell-Boudreau, who is from Legal Services of North Florida. We have a pretty star-studded cast for you today. The topic of this webinar will be talking about funding for legal services working in and around elder justice, as well as what their models look like. So with that, I will first hand it on off to Hillary to talk about ACL and the work that they're doing in elder justice and how they can support legal services, as well as a little bit about responses to COVID-19. She will then go ahead and pass it off to Karen Buck from SeniorLAW Center, who will talk about their work with elder justice and a particular VOCA-funded initiative. Then we will hear from Indiana Legal Services about their LAVA project and how that's funded. And then finally, we will hear from Leslie, who will talk about their work throughout the state and partnerships and how they're implementing their various projects. We also have time for a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to send those in at the chat box on the bottom right of your screen. You can also message me individually. I will keep a running list of questions, and depending on timing, I will either ask them after individuals have presented or save them until the end. So with that, I hand it on off to Hillary.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you especially to my co-presenters, who I feel very blessed to consider friends, who we also fund under the Older Americans Act, and in 2 of the 3 cases through grant funding, and from whom I continue to learn a lot every day. I wanted to start by giving everybody a brief overview of the Administration for Community Living, Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services, just in the event that there might be someone who isn't familiar with us. I always like to say that our office name is a misnomer in the sense that we do a great deal of elder justice work. We do consider ourselves the federal home for adult protective services, which is very important for reasons that go beyond this webinar. But if anyone wants to talk to me about that, please don't hesitate to be in touch. We also do a fair amount of elder rights work, including the Legal Assistance Enhancement Program grants, the National Center for Law and Elder Rights, both of which I will be talking about in a moment, as well as we have the privilege of some oversight and support for the Older Americans Act funding that goes to legal assistance programs in every state, including, I hope, from some of the 100 or so participants in this webinar. And it's important to note this because aligning elder rights with elder justice and forging strong relationships and foundations at the national, state, and local level is what we need to establish a more just society, and that's never been more true than now. I wish we could spend an hour or 5 or 6 talking just about that, and Casey, maybe you'll set up another webinar for us to do that. But right now, what I want to do is walk you through some opportunities and some resources from the Administration for Community Living, specifically from our office, for everybody on this call. So first, Casey had asked that I talk about the Legal Assistance Enhancement Program grants, which despite what the acronym should look like, we thought that it would be really cool to call these LEAP grants. So that's what you'll hear Karen and Leslie, who are two of our 6 grantees, calling it. I guess technically it should be LAPE, but LEAP has a nice ring to it, you know, and that's really what we want to do here is leap forward. So forgive me for that, but these are called LEAP grants. And so the language you see in front of you on your screen is directly from the funding opportunity announcement. And going from the bottom up, I think we all are committed to the idea that legal assistance does enable older Americans to assert their rights and to remove the barriers that exist to their economic and personal independence and self-determination. And that's why the purpose of the LEAP grants is to strengthen and enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of these programs that serve older Americans. About 2/3 of which, maybe slightly less than that right now, are housed within Legal Services Corporation grantees, and that means that at least 1/3 are not. So we are very committed to connecting to all of the programs that have Older Americans Act funding because of the conceptual importance of legal assistance, as this slide says. So, whoops, let me go back up here, talk a little bit more about the LEAP grants. Okay, so LEAP grants focus on a full scope of interrelated activities that everyone on this call knows are very important to comprise robust legal aid. And they are outreach. Outreach for what purpose? To educate and to lead to intake, in our instance, of older Americans with economic or social need, language of the Older Americans Act, to bring them in through intake services that are efficient and effective for a full range of legal assistance that's appropriate to the situation, and that involves all of the essential partnerships for working together with older individuals, and also for issue spotting, for referrals, and all the rest. I'm sure that this is familiar to anyone who's on this webinar. These LEAP grants are our first ever. In other words, we just started these grants, and we have 6 grantees. They are all working on integrated services, integrating all of those functions that I just spoke about. And we have, I just want to briefly talk about the other 4. One is working on integrating rights and services related to elders in managed long-term services and supports. Another is focusing on civil legal interventions that restore agency to elders who have experienced abuse, neglect, or exploitation. A third is a medical legal partnership. Those aren't new. Many of you probably have them, but there are very few that focus on older adults. And our LEAP grantee is working on, along with the other, we think that there are 8 others in the country that are focusing on older adults to understand and explore the adjustments that need to be made to the model for responsiveness and sensitivity to the needs of elders in a medical legal partnership. And finally, we have a grantee working on statewide enhancement of legal assistance to older Americans in a very rural state. Now, you'll hear from the other 2 in just a moment, but what I wanted to emphasize is that while none of these are novel ideas, and I apologize, Karen and Leslie, you're very creative and you're doing fabulous work. There are others around the country thinking about all of these ideas too. The opportunity of the LEAP grants is to have, if you will, the luxury of time and resources to think and operate deeply to lead to enhancements and innovations that are sustainable and also replicable. Finally, I wanted to note that all of our LEAP grantees are still in the formative developmental stage. They're not quite ready for full-on implementation, but they're getting close. They're working on logic models. And for those of you who'd like to talk about logic models or other ways of doing the same thing, again, happy to spend more time talking about that at another time. The logic models are a roadmap to assure fidelity to the objectives of the grants and to make sure that they are, that we are all proceeding down a straight path to achieving those objectives. So there's no lessons learned yet, except that this is not easy, but that our grantees are worthy of the challenge. And we are looking forward to working with these grantees as they move forward through implementations to learn lessons over the next 2.5 years. So I also wanted to promote our National Center for Law and Elder Rights, NCLR with a hard C. I'm not going to go through this slide. I'm going to certainly hope that everyone on this call is familiar with NCLR. If you're not, I would strongly encourage you to go to the URL that you see there. I can't say enough about their expertise, and Karen, Leslie, and Jessica, if you want to put in a boost for them too, please do. They are making contributions every day to success of legal services programs, of course, focusing on those that work with older Americans. I want to briefly talk about COVID. It's changed everybody's lives upside down. It has created great risk and danger for older people all over this country. Our legal assistance providers, including the 3 on this call and their colleagues all over the country, in concert with NCLR and with their partners and our resource centers for their partners in adult protective services and in long-term care ombudsman programs, are working tirelessly, as you all did, first of all, to change on a dime to the remote practice. To try and stay safe, yet be there for older individuals who are in harm's way, not of their choosing because of where they live or because of their risk factors. There are lots of resources, and I just again want to just promote NCLR. We did a webinar through NCLR with Pro Bono Net a couple of weeks ago with over 3,000 legal aid participants. It was, I believe, the first one, there have been several since, talking about how to do a full scope practice of legal aid remotely. We followed that up with a Q&A webinar, fact sheets. There's going to be an article coming out soon. And NCLR is doing at least weekly tips that are coming by email. Sign up for them, please. And also webinars about COVID. And finally, I want to promote their case consultations. They really are experts. And I will say, as someone who was a legal aid lawyer and manager for many, many, many years before I came down to work for the federal government, that there's always something to be learned. And no matter how much you think you know, the fact is about COVID, none of us know anything. So I would just encourage you to consult with NCLR. By the way, their latest email tip was just a couple of hours ago, and it was about the complexities of getting the stimulus payments for certain SSI beneficiaries who have not filed tax returns and who have kids. And it's clear and concise. So anyway, I don't want to take any more time here, but just to really emphasize that NCLR is a great resource, and that we also are very eager to know what you're doing, and just really would be very happy to speak with you myself if you would like to. That's how I got to know Jessica, right, Jessica? We just connected over some shared interest and passion for legal aid combating elder abuse, and so I would just encourage, if you'd like to chat with me, to do that as well. And with that, I'm going to turn us over. Oh, I forgot the Elder Justice Toolkit. How awful. I want to encourage you to look at the Elder Justice Toolkit. This is literally what it says it is. It is a practice toolkit for overburdened, understaffed legal aid programs. This toolkit has a number of modules that will literally walk somebody through identifying and handling elder abuse legal cases in a trauma-informed way, no matter where you are, no matter what part of legal aid you're involved with. There's a national template. It has been customized for about 2/3 of the states. If it's not customized in your state and you would like to talk about customizing it or having it customized for your state so it can be used by your legal aid program, please be in touch with me, and I would be very happy to talk to you about that. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and hand this over to Karen Buck, Executive Director, SeniorLAW Center.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, Casey, and everyone joining us today, and of course to my co-presenters. It's great to be here virtually with all of you. I'm going the wrong way on the slides, but I'm learning this WebEx. As Hillary and Casey mentioned, I am the Executive Director of SeniorLAW Center based in Pennsylvania. We are headquartered in Philadelphia with 5 offices in the southeastern region of Pennsylvania, and we also run the Pennsylvania Senior Law Helpline, so reaching all 67 counties through helpline legal services for older people. And this is our mission. Fairly new mission statement. We're 42 years old. Like many of you, we are a legal services organization targeting older people, and we framed it to say we're seeking justice for older people by using the power of the law, educating the community, and advocating on local, state, and national levels. And we are using terminology very carefully. Advocacy is such an important part of what we do as legal services attorneys, and it's a real critical piece of what we do in addition to legal representation and education. And this is a little snapshot of our organization. We're now about 35 diverse, and I underscore diverse. We're very multilingual, multicultural, and we're very proud of that, from 25 to 65 years of age and growing. Attorneys and legal advocates, and we're serving approximately 10,000 older people in Pennsylvania each year. And like most of you, all of our services are free, and all the Older Americans Act language, we are also targeting seniors in the greatest social and economic need. And I'll talk a little bit about our COVID-19 responses towards the end of my presentation, should we have time. But we have many special projects listed here, really comprehensive legal services, and always looking for new and innovative ways to do legal services for older people, including court-based access to justice projects. And that has been a big initiative. We have several going on when the courts are open and trying to do it while they're closed. And we also work expansively with pro bono partners, both corporate and law firm, and of course, law schools, et cetera. And our advocacy on the statewide, local, and national level has probably never been more important than it is right now during COVID. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And still going in the wrong direction. So I know we're here also to talk about how we fund elder justice in our country. And so this slide really talks about some of the federal funding streams that we have pursued successfully, and some that come through the state. So as Hillary mentioned, yes, we are the largest Title IIIB provider in Philadelphia County, which happens to have the unhappy moniker of the poorest large city in the nation. So we are facing extreme poverty in Philadelphia, extreme senior poverty in Philadelphia. Over 20 3% of seniors in Philadelphia live in or below the poverty level, and 50%, 1 in 2, live at 200% or below. So we are really struggling in Philadelphia, and deep poverty is an issue as well. So we are the Title IIIB, primary Title III provider in Philadelphia. We have 2 colleagues we work closely with. And then, of course, we have our 67 counties in Philadelphia and 52 area agencies on aging. So we do try to be collaborative in working with them. As Hillary mentioned, we are happily one of 6 LEAP grantees through ACL, and we're very grateful for that support. And just briefly, our project is focusing on seeking justice for grandparents raising grandchildren in Pennsylvania. Again, not a new idea. We've been actually doing that for about 20 years, but it's the first time we've had a real significant influx of support to do it really comprehensively and to respond to the opioid crisis in our nation, which was the crisis we were really focused on, like a target before the most recent crisis, and we'll continue to focus on it. In Pennsylvania alone, we have over 100,000 children being raised by grandparents and other older people raising young children, and we know the challenges of that. So we are really digging deep to be creative and innovative in how we expand intake, education, outreach, and enhance a whole range of legal services for these multi-generational families, which are really also really challenged during this COVID crisis, as children are at home and their grandparents and older caregivers are most at risk for the virus. So we're really excited to work with ACL on that program and expanding the legal services and responses to those intergenerational families. And they're really heroes doing tremendous work for these kids at risk. And our Secretary of Aging estimates that grandparents raising grandchildren are saving at least $1 billion in costs to our Commonwealth. Briefly, some other funding streams we've pursued successfully, and I'll talk more about our specific victim services in a minute, are JAG funded programs, Justice Assistance Grants. They also come through our VOCA administrator in Pennsylvania. And we've had programs to serve specifically senior veterans who are victims of abuse and exploitation, as well as to provide statewide elder victim technical assistance for growing numbers of new elder victim programs. So folks who had never served older victims before being able to cross the state and provide assistance and training for them. And that's been a wonderful program. And then many of you have received or are quite familiar with the Department of Justice Legal Assistance for Victims funding program, and that was some of our earliest funding for older victims. And so we strongly emphasize those when they are available to look at how we can serve older victims, not just of intimate partner violence, but other forms of elder abuse. I put in CDBG, which is our Community Development Block Grant, because we receive that money in good times, and we're hoping it will continue, to work for older people who are facing foreclosure and other housing crises, not specifically victims, although there certainly are many housing victim-related issues. But this is a great funding stream for us to serve comprehensively other types of legal challenges that older people are facing, and obviously housing is one of the most important of those. And then finally, VOCA. Many of you are VOCA recipients. VOCA has really changed the world for victim services and for older victims, and particularly in Pennsylvania. I must give a big shout out to our VOCA administrating agency, the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. They have been a leader, I think, nationally in really prioritizing the needs of older victims with their funding and with their initiatives, and also prioritizing civil legal services. So they from the get-go, have really focused on the needs of older victims and tried to make sure that a significant amount of Victims of Crime Act funds in Pennsylvania went to serve the needs of older victims. And all of us who serve older people and are legal aid attorneys and advocates for older people know that older people often languish in the shadows of fundraising. And this is one area where I'm very proud of Pennsylvania taking the lead in many ways and really investing in services for older victims. And that funding has really transformed our organization in many ways, in ways that we can better serve older people. So our original project for victims was called Project SAFE, Stop Abuse and Financial Exploitation. And this was actually launched in 1996, a year before I became executive director. So I've been around a while, and Project SAFE has been around a while. So we were one of the first civil legal services programs in the country to serve victims of elder abuse. And that was actually long before we were getting VOCA funding. That was through a Independence Foundation fellowship for a brand new lawyer coming into public interest. But it is broad-ranging and has expanded tremendously legal and supportive services for diverse older victims. So that was our original project. And this is what Project SAFE has provided and is now providing. Very broad, supportive, and legal services, direct legal representation and counsel, both, of course, for physical abuse and protection from abuse, as well as the broad-ranging and very devastating forms of financial exploitation that are facing older Americans. We also address other forms of abuse, emotional abuse, sexual assault, etc. And I would just point out that criminal and civil justice partnerships are so important to this project. We work very closely with our prosecutor's office, with the district attorney, with the U.S. attorney, with the attorney general, as well as, of course, all of our legal services and victim services partners and our aging network partners. So it is primarily legal services and legal options and safety planning for older victims. But we also try very hard to provide a whole range of supportive services, recognizing that people may need help negotiating healthcare, counseling, access to emergency financial assistance, housing help, etc. And we do home, hospital, and nursing home and long-term care visits when we used to be able to visit our clients in their residential facilities, and their homes, which of course has been put on hold for a little bit. But I think that's a very important part of this project, that we go where people live. We're in the community, and many of our clients are very, very vulnerable. We're also, of course, trying to connect them with victim compensation assistance, and I mentioned the holistic connections to other supportive services. And importantly, and this is part of our many projects at SeniorLAW Center, we have 8 community clinics where we're doing intake in the community in normal times when we can be out in the community and be there where individuals are and serve them in the languages they speak. And I'm keeping an eye on my time because I know it's going quickly. Here's some of the ways that we've been continuing to expand our Project SAFE and our victim services through VOCA. So we were able to open 4 additional offices to specifically serve victims in those communities. And these are primarily rural and suburban communities surrounding Philadelphia. And that was a big, big step for us. We have always had a large Philadelphia presence, a very big city in America, a very poor city, as I mentioned, and now we are able to really have boots on the ground and offices and to be connecting with victims in their own communities and the partners that we work with so frequently. And so that was a big expansion that we're so grateful to the VOCA investment in. And that was primarily focused on various forms of financial exploitation. Additionally, we are now, as most of the VOCA providers know who are on the call, and thank you, Department of Justice and OVC, are able to expand the services that we provide. So we are able to address the ancillary, expanded legal issues that victims are facing that arise from victimization. So housing issues, family law issues, other types of pressing legal issues that are beyond your traditional PFA and financial exploitation. And then we were able to further expand to have specific programs for older veterans and specific programs for those with limited English. And this is a very important part of what we're doing. As a former ESL teacher, it's near and dear to my heart. Language access is such an important component of our programs, particularly now, with all of the challenges that immigrant communities are facing and older people being isolated by culture and language even more so. We're happy to expand that further. So I only have a couple minutes maybe, but I'm going to quickly try to go through some of our COVID-19 responses for victims, especially during this time. So of course, courts are closed, but we've been doing emergency responses, including important emergency protection from abuse responses. We all know that older victims in isolation are even more at risk during this time and during this crisis, and we believe that elder abuse is even more hidden during this crisis, and we're all very concerned about that. So with the courts and our domestic violence and other partners, we've been creating emergency responses so that despite court closures, we can ensure that people have the emergency protections that they need. And we've also been advocating statewide with our courts. We have 62 judicial districts in Pennsylvania, and everyone does things a little bit differently. So as we're working through our statewide senior law helpline, like many other senior legal hotlines and helplines around the country, we're hearing from people throughout the state, and we want to be able to guide them and particularly victims to get the emergency resources and responses they need during this crisis. Everyone hears me talk about our really transformative Supreme Court Elder Justice Initiative, and our Supreme Court has really taken tremendous leadership, shown tremendous leadership in making elder justice a priority. We have an Office of Elder Justice in the courts, and that has really been transformative for us. So the last couple of pages I just have, we've created some COVID-19 flyers, and as well as a health and wellness questionnaire for clients where we've been looking through all of the issues that seniors are facing, and specifically the priority legal issues during the COVID-19 crisis. So I don't have time to go through them, but they are in the PowerPoint that will be shared, and lots of great resources there. I think I'm out of time. Casey's giving me the time. Of course, we could all talk much longer about all of these wonderful resources. I hope that we have time to share and connect further after this webinar is over. And I'm happy to turn it over to Jessica now to share about her program.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Jessica Brock. I'm a staff attorney with the LAVA project at Indiana Legal Services. We're the LSC legal services provider for the state of Indiana. I started at Indiana Legal Services in January of 2017 as one of the founding attorneys in the LAVA project, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to share our experience in creating, funding, and nurturing a successful legal services project for older adults and endangered adults who are victims of crime. I hope that our experience will be of some help or inspiration to you. Here's the necessary language. So what is the LAVA project? We wanted a catchy acronym for our project, and LAVA is what we landed on. Kind of weird for Indiana, but LAVA stands for Legal Assistance for Victimized Adults. And the mission of the LAVA project is basically divided into two arms: provision of direct legal services to victims of crime, and provision of legal education to professionals and the public. We provide quality legal representation to seniors and endangered adults who are victims of criminal behavior, including abuse, neglect, and exploitation, in order to ease or eliminate the negative effects of these crimes. We also provide law-related education and proactive programming designed to empower seniors and endangered adults. And this includes trainings for staff at financial institutions, adult protective services, area agencies on aging, and members of law enforcement. I want to briefly talk about who our clients are. So as I said, our clients are victims of crime who are either older adults or endangered adults. In Indiana, a senior is someone who's age 60 or older. And because we work closely with adult protective services, we take the definition for endangered adult from our state's adult protective services statute. We made a conscious choice that our clients must also have the ability to retain legal counsel, so our clients can rely on trusted others for assistance in navigating their case. We do require that our clients have the capacity to retain counsel, and I'll come back to why we made these choices a little later. Just a few examples of the kinds of cases we take. Really like for the work most of you do, we provide legal assistance like any law firm would, ranging from legal advice to extended litigation and appellate work. And all of our legal assistance, of course, relates to victimization. So believe it or not, the LAVA project actually came to be thanks to an NLADA meeting in Chicago in the spring of 2016. Our resource development director, Ron Geyer, was attending the meeting in Chicago, and at this meeting, different funding possibilities for legal aid programs were discussed. And VOCA, Victims of Crime Act funding, was one of the funding possibilities discussed at the NLADA meeting. Dennis Frick, who is the director of the Senior Law Project at Indiana Legal Services, had long had an idea of creating an elder abuse project. Dennis has been at ILS for over 40 years and is a prominent member of the Elder Law Bar in Indiana. And from his experience, he saw that there was a need for an elder abuse project. Dennis also recognized the importance of creating a project where the victims were the clients. There were other efforts around to provide guardianships or work with people through advocates. And while these were and are incredibly important, we sensed an unmet need to represent victims directly in our area. So shortly after Ron returned from the NLADA meeting in Chicago, some articles ran in the Indianapolis Star about the Indiana Adult Protective Services units being overwhelmed and underfunded. I'm sure that's unfamiliar to anyone else on the call. Ron and Dennis had the foresight and the creativity to think about creating a project that would address the need for an elder abuse project, the need to have a project focused on direct service to victims, and the need to offer services to adult protective services. So they decided to apply for VOCA funding to make this project possible. They put together an application in 2016, and due to the desire to work closely with adult protective services, they decided that the project should be structured so that any member of the APS client population would be eligible for assistance in the project. So therefore, our client base was defined as victims of crime who are either seniors or endangered adults using the APS definition, and that the client must have the ability to retain counsel. So we started in January 2017, VOCA funding, and we are a statewide project covering all 92 counties. This is the front page article from the Indianapolis Star in 2016 talking about APS's more assistance given the amount of work they had to do. So how are we funded? As I said, Ron and Dennis put together an application for a VOCA funded project. The matching requirement for VOCA grants is 20%. ILS has created create a proposed budget so that the 20% matching portion of our budget would reflect fixed costs like office space, IT support equipment, utilities, etc. In Indiana, Karen mentioned who their administrator is. The administrator in Indiana VOCA funding is the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute. And the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute approved our 2016 grant proposal allowing us to start the LAVA project. With that money, ILS was able to hire 2 attorneys, of which I was one, a paralegal to cover the entire state of Indiana. VOCA grants are 2 years long and are renewable. We've just submitted our 3rd VOCA application for the LAVA project. We were funded from 2016 to 2018. 2018 to 2020, our funding ends September of 2020, and we hope to be funded again 2020 to in this time, we've grown from 2 attorneys and 1 paralegal to 3 attorneys, 1 paralegal, and a social worker. And we recently received 2 Elder Justice Project Fellows from Equal Justice. So we've increased our funding from being a solely VOCA funded program to now also having the great benefit of hosting 2 Elder Justice Project Fellows from Equal Justice Works who will begin with us. In our present grant application, we've also asked for additional staff resources. Our program continues to grow. We'll see those requests are granted. These are our funders. So we receive VOCA funding through the Department of Justice, which is administered by Indiana Criminal Justice Institute. And because our matching funds through the VOCA grant reflect fixed costs, most of these funds come through Legal Services Corporation funding given to Indiana Legal Services. ILS has other projects also funded with VOCA funds apart from the LAVA project. VOCA does allow grant applicants to ask for a waiver of the match funding, and this waiver reduces the match requirement from 20% to 10%. So in our last grant cycle, ILS did apply for a match waiver, and we fortunately won, for which we're very grateful. So at present, our match requirement is 10% of the budget and still reflects fixed costs. Some things that we think helped strengthen our application, of course, you never know for sure, but these are some things that we think helped our grant applications past and present. The LAVA project meets a need that no other organization addresses in Indiana, and it is the need for legal services that drives the project. There's no other organization providing civil legal representation, for elder abuse victims or victims of crime who are endangered adults. Another thing is that our advocacy is effective and compelling, and the stories grab the attention. ILS is the only LSC legal aid organization in Indiana, and it's the largest provider of pro bono legal services in Indiana. We have a network of 8 regional offices throughout the state. It allows us to be present in all 92 counties, and so we believe that ILS's resources and standing in the community also strengthen our grant application. At least initially, and I think still to this day, Dennis Frick, who's the project director, his experience in standing in the legal community certainly helped give credibility to our initial application. We've been able to get meaningful letters of support from key players like the state elder law chair, adult protective services directors, prosecutors, area agencies on aging, and financial. We've had the great fortune of being on the faculty of national conferences, sharing our experience in using civil legal aid to help combat elder abuse and victimization of endangered adults. And this demonstrates to our funders that we not only help clients in Indiana, but that their funding helps a broader community as well. Some of our clients have been covered by the media in Indiana, again showing that the project and the funding are helping and educating a larger population. And finally, we've helped start a statewide coalition against elder abuse in Indiana called InCase, and we are members of other community partnerships that address elder abuse. I think our funders appreciate seeing how we share our resources and expertise with other stakeholders trying to serve similar populations. We also make regular visits to and contact with all of the APS units, the area agencies on aging in the state of Indiana that help us build relationships and coalitions. As I just mentioned, we do coordinate with APS and area agencies on aging, financial institutions, police departments, We've given trainings at roll call for officers, before they go out on shift. And for law enforcement, we have half-day and full-day trainings. We work with places of worship we consider safe spaces to reach people to educate them about elder abuse. It can be a difficult and time-consuming thing to make community outreach a priority because of the geographic distances we have to cover and because of the demands of our caseloads, but we believe that this is an equally important part of our mission to provide community outreach and legal information to the public. We prioritize this for a couple of reasons, including that outreach is a means for maintaining referral networks. As outreach increases, so do referrals for cases, and establishing new referring partners. Community outreach is also a way to educate professionals who may meet our clients first and help identify victimization, like law enforcement, financial institutions, medical professionals, social workers, domestic violence advocates, etc. And it's also a way to provide information to the public and reduce the stigma around elder abuse. And we hope that by reducing stigma, more people might report their victimization and seek help from us or other agencies. And when we do this outreach, we, as much as possible, try to coordinate with other agencies like APS, police, fire, financial institutions, visually show the public how we work together behind the scenes to address their needs, that we are connected and we're working together and that we're on the same page. I find that that's very important. So here's my contact information. I'm happy to answer questions now or later or hear about the work you're doing. I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this webinar, and it's now my great pleasure to pass the baton to Leslie Powell-Boudreau, Legal Services of North Florida.
Services in North Florida. Just to give a little bit of information about what we do, we are an LSC-funded law firm that covers the Florida Panhandle. That's the easiest way to describe it. We're in North Florida, up to Alabama and Georgia, west to Alabama, and then east to just past Tallahassee and the Big Bend area. And we have, for many years, had Older Americans Act funding through our local our State Department of Elder Affairs, both Title IIIB and Title IIIE, that allowed us to serve those over 60 and caregivers in certain categories. What we have found over time is that that's simply not enough to cover the need, as any of you who receive those funds has probably found. We're always competing for those pots of funds with others who provide food and other forms of care that seem more like basic necessities, and it's the typical challenge of explaining the value and importance of legal services within some of our communities. In 2000, I'm not even sure what day it is or year, but a couple of years ago, we had our Elder Affairs representative actually reach out based on funding that they had received from ACL to do what was then called the Model Approaches Project. And it was a statewide effort through Elder Affairs to really try to form some consistency amongst our programs and really build the work that we were doing. And so they had successfully implemented that project over the past several years. And when the LEAP funding that Hillary spoke of became available, reached out and said, hey, what do you think? And in particular, they were very interested in the issues surrounding elders who were recovering at the time from Hurricane Michael, which came through our service area in October of 2018. So we started that conversation and looked at how we could define this as a statewide project. And we have a really good relationship with the other legal aid programs in our state, and in particular, Legal Services of Greater Miami had also faced a significant hurricane in 2017 and was recovering. And so we put our heads together and really talked about who we saw had the most critical needs within our community, where the gaps were in the services that we were providing. We also receive Department of Justice funding. Some counties we get CDBG funding, some counties we get VOCA funding, but it's all very finite and focused on these targeted populations. VOCA in Florida, for example, doesn't allow us to do any outreach and any community education. It's strictly case services. So getting into the community and helping people understand their rights is not really part of the VOCA mission, which is a huge gap when you're trying to talk to elders and explain to elders that the treatment by their family members is inappropriate, and beyond inappropriate, it's illegal. So we really sort of put our heads together on where do we want to fill these gaps, and how can we, between the mostly rural Florida Panhandle and the mostly urban Miami-Dade County, create a model that fills the gaps that we're seeing and addresses those really specific issues of disaster response. Some of y'all may have heard after Hurricane Irma, there were issues in the nursing homes where air conditioners were not functioning or potentially even there, and generators were certainly not there in most of those nursing homes, and people died as a result of that lack of disaster planning in some of those South Florida nursing homes. And so that's a real critical need that because it hadn't been paid attention to, and we hadn't had a serious storm in a number of years, had essentially been ignored. We were facing increases in homelessness. We were certainly seeing increased consumer scams and other forms of economic exploitation, again, that elder abuse that I spoke of. So we, again, put our heads together, saw these critical needs, and said, this seems to be what we should be working on. This seems to be where the gaps are, and we can create a model that our colleagues in Florida and perhaps elsewhere could use tools, and that creative piece, that luxury of time and resources to identify what those better tools are that Hillary spoke of would be available and would be something we could create. So we started writing the script. We started putting together the plan of what this would look like. That was through the application that we submitted. We reached out to a lot of our partners. I noticed that some of my colleagues from Three Rivers Legal Services, just east of us, and Bay Area Legal Services, which staff the Senior Legal Helpline in Florida. I noticed them on the call as well. And we reached out to them. Three Rivers was actually, through that Model Approaches project, able to launch a medical legal partnership, and so they had learned a lot of lessons that we could take from. And we just had some really intense conversations. I think one of the challenges that I'll speak to as we talk about funding and how you create these projects is both of our programs, because we were responding to disasters, weren't sure we had the capacity to take on a project like this. We were concerned that we weren't going to be able to implement it well. We were concerned, is now the right time? And I'm sure we'll still learn lessons as we go through this process, but I think if you asked either of us, it was worth the investment of time to really put those thoughts on paper and talk about if we could envision what's missing and what we would do to fill those gaps. To really just go through that exercise was really critical to the project, and I think to our understanding of the systems that exist in our state. So part of the LEAP project grant was to focus on these four focus areas that are on the screen in front of you: intake, outreach, direct legal assistance, and essential partnerships. As part of that Model Approaches grant, the Department of Elder Affairs had worked to develop a risk assessment tool that elder providers could use to identify whether or not there was a legal need amongst the people they were serving. This is a tool that was created by Pro Bono Net and has been launched in a number of other states as well. It's developed specifically for different states. It's really an excellent way to try to communicate that question that many of our community partners see of: how do I identify that the problem my client has is a legal need and has a legal solution? And it's a tool that we're continuing to roll out in Florida and sort through and train the users on and do all those things. So again, it's yet to come what we learned from that and how well we can deploy that across the state. The other component was outreach, really developing comprehensive tools to do that outreach and education and develop deeper relationships with our providers. It's great that we can engage in referrals, but what's the conversation that we should be having with each of them to better understand what they're seeing in their work and how we can support the people they're serving and vice versa. Direct legal assistance is something that seems like we're all doing is all of those critical needs that seniors see, whether it's housing or food access or abuse, economic issues, all of those things. But we also said, we've got all these pro bono attorneys or people that we want to do pro bono, and we think that they would do more of it if they knew they were supporting our elder population. But how do we get them trained? So what are the tools that we would create if we were going to really train the private bar in doing this kind of work and doing it in a trauma-informed, compassionate way? And then again, the essential partnerships. Who needs to be at the table for this project to be a success? I've talked about the Senior Helpline. The Florida Health Justice Network is based out of South Florida, but Miriam Harmatz is serving the entire state in the work that she's doing. We reached out to the National Consumer Law Center, our local area agencies on aging, and the Florida Bar Foundation is also supporting the work that we're doing. I want to share Hillary's shout out to NCLR. I think I saw that Sarah Galvin is on the call as well, and she's been a real resource for us, she and her team, in getting us information and finding out what we need and helping to meet those needs. And it's been a really good partnership. So we wrote the script, we pitched it, we were told we could go ahead and start filming, we could implement. And so this is the planning part that Hillary was talking about. We've done the hiring, we've developed a project plan, we're working on the logic plan that she mentioned, we're doing all the documentation to get the ducks in a row. As y'all can tell, I was trying to stick to this script writing sort of TV show or movie, and so I've called ACL the Wise Mentor, because this is a collaborative grant. This was a unique and a first experience for us, because we're not used to funders who actually care about the work that we do beyond a compliance level. At least that may not be fair to our other funders, because they do, but I think this is that we have regular calls with Hillary and her team. We have regular calls with the NCLR folks, and we have calls with the other grantees in the program, because there's so many lessons that we can learn from each other and that we can stay on track. And that exchange of information on that regular of a basis has been a unique experience that we've enjoyed having. I know we have lots of other funders who do that, but this was the first time at the federal level with an agency-funded grant that we've had a collaborative grant, and it's really interesting to have that sort of engagement and to have that level of support. And then what I'm calling the plot twist is COVID-19. So we were about 6 months in when COVID really started becoming a regular part of our conversation. And outreach to elders is a challenge on a good day, because many of them are homebound. Many of them don't have access to technology, and if they do, they don't necessarily know how to use it the way that we do on a daily basis. And so suddenly we can't go to senior centers and go to where the food programs are and share information in the way that we typically had. We can't even go to the provider agencies and hope that we're training the people who might be delivering the food to those who are homebound. So, we're doing that pivot. Sorry, I apologize. Everybody's using that word right now, but we're doing that pivot. We're doing that transition, looking at how we can do things more creatively. NCLR's already done a training on helping us sort of brainstorm that and work through that. We're working how we build relationships remotely. Again, we were only 6 months in. There were new agencies and new people that we needed to build relationships with. We weren't quite there yet. And so, we're having to make some changes in how we do that. And then again, the new legal issues that we're all seeing. We're seeing all sorts of issues with the stimulus checks and elders have unemployment assistance applications. The food programs are all different. The eviction moratorium in Florida is this patchwork that doesn't always make sense on a good day either. And then there's the hidden abuse for people who can't leave their homes and they're living with family members, and how do we reach out to them and how do they reach out to us? So we're still figuring all these things out. And that brings me to what I call the cliffhanger, is what's next? Where do we go from here? How will this end? And how will we finally ultimately implement all of these ideas moving forward? And I'm as curious as you. We'll have to hang on for the next episode and see what's to come. But it is a really exciting program. It is a really exciting partnership between two very different programs and very different communities to really find that sweet spot for where Florida can work best together to serve our elder population. And so my contact information is on the slide for any questions that we aren't able to get to in the next little bit of the program. Please feel free to reach out. I guess it's back to you, Casey.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our presenters for talking about their work. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them on over to me either through the chat option or the Q&A. I will be reviewing them as they come in and then posing them to our panel. So feel free to go ahead and send those in. I do have one question coming from folks. Do you have tips on how to strengthen grant applications and identify partners in the community to work with? And that's open to anyone who wants to share.
So this is Karen. I'll take a crack at that. So I think there's two universes that we're dealing with, the current COVID-19 crisis. And we didn't get to talk about it much, but we launched a COVID-19 fund for older people in the Pennsylvania region. And are getting great responses to that. And I'm sure in all of your communities, there are particular foundations and other funders who are launching special resources for all of us to respond to the needs of COVID-19 of our clients during the crisis. And I have to say, the messaging that older people are at the epicenter of this crisis, the most likely to be vulnerable to the virus, the most likely to die, the nursing home challenges and the outrage we all feel about what's happening in long-term care. I mean, those messages have really resonated with funders during this crisis. So I would put that out there. In terms of messaging during normal times, there is an educational piece, I think, as we all know who serve older people, in really explaining, why do older people need lawyers? Why are they facing poverty legal issues? Why do poor people need lawyers? And how the law affects the lives of older people and people in poverty so dramatically. There are many myths and misunderstanding of many funders on that realm. And we did a lot of education to get our VOCA leaders a lot of time and energy to really pitch that and explain to them the challenges that older people and older victims face. Also, just facing head-on the ageism and paternalism in our country. Also, recognizing that elder abuse is a legal and health crisis in our country. The Elder Justice Act is under the Affordable Care Act, and that is parameters. I mean, just recognizing all that and the messaging, the devastation to older people, to their lives, to their legacies, and just to their very survival. That those messages have resonated with our funders and our supporters.
Hi, this is Hillary. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, super. So I would like to take on this question too. Having been in the position of grant writing and grant recipient, and now being in the position of grant maker, I have some thoughts on this. The first is to be very clear what it is that you're looking for funding to do. And then, so don't let the funding opportunities define what you apply for. Rather, look for funding opportunities that resonate with what your goals are. Because then the second thing I want to say is to be very careful to follow what the grant application is asking you to say. Don't think that the structure of a funding opportunity announcement is there to be played with, to be creative about. No, particularly if it's a government entity, but I would say also most foundations. They're asking you to tell them things because those are the things that they, the funders, need to know to decide whether they are going to make an award to you or not. So I'll give you an example from our Administration for Community Living grant making. We mostly do cooperative agreements precisely for the reasons that Leslie mentioned. We are passionate about the work we fund, and we do want to be collaborative and to work along with you. In a cooperative agreement funding opportunity, we're going to tell you exactly what we're looking for. And not only that, we're going to tell you the questions we want you to answer in the application. And beyond that, we're going to tell you how the objective reviewers who are going to rate and score applications are going to do that. What questions are going to guide their evaluation? So right there, you've got 3 ways to think very carefully about what we as a funder are looking for. And I am still amazed by how many people put in grant proposals that are not responsive to what we have said we're looking for. And it's heartbreaking because they're always really great ideas, and there are things that under other circumstances perhaps we would fund. But when we put a funding opportunity announcement out there, we've been very clear about what it is we're looking for. And if you can be very clear about responding to what we're looking for, you have a much enhanced chance of actually being awarded a grant.
And I guess the only point that I would add to that, and I think that the challenge that we faced because we were working with 2 different programs was how do we find the shared space with the questions that Hillary just asked. But I also think because we had both been working in that disaster realm and building relationships with those who are responding to disasters in a really intensive way, that it helped to speed this grant. And I think that's one of the lessons that we've learned in disaster response that I think we're starting to do better to apply to every other area of practice and every other area of grant writing that we do, is when we're developing programs, we do work with our community partners who are out already in the community, who may have an interaction that's very different than the interaction that we have with clients. And so those other agencies know us. They reach out to us on a regular basis for information and letters of support and other things, so that it's a very natural exchange, and it doesn't just come up when it's time to write the grant. And we see each other in the community, we see the work that we're doing, and then I think this is the most powerful point, when they actually have one of their clients who can say, I received help, and this is the value of services, then their contributions to these projects and how they write those letters of support become so much more powerful and so much more engaging. And so I'm sure each of y'all have community partners that you can think of who fit into that realm. We've just really tried to amplify that and do more and more of that so that we know more about what our sister agencies are doing outside of what we need from them and what that legal assistance relationship is.
Great, and we have another question that's just come in. Will there be another opportunity to apply for LEAP funding? And if so, do you know about when? So this one I'm assuming is for you, Hillary.
I love that question. Thank you to whoever asked it. We certainly hope so. We always have to say in the government, and I know that there are some of my government colleagues listening to this call as well, so call out to you, colleagues as well. We always have to caveat what we say with the words, should funding be available? Should funding be available, we do expect that LEAP grants will continue and that our current 6 are only the first generation of LEAP grantees. The next round would be in federal fiscal year 2021, which means we'll be thinking about it towards the end of this federal fiscal year, which kind of means towards the fall or the winter. We're going to start thinking, but then the funding opportunity can't come out until these grants are over, and they've got 2.5 more years left. So the short answer is yes, we certainly hope so. Subject to the availability of appropriations, we are very committed to this grant.
Great, thank you. And we don't have any more questions that have come in. If any of our presenters have any final thoughts that they want to share, now is the time. But if not, I will go ahead and wrap up this webinar. So do any of you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I just wanted to reiterate what I said in the beginning, which is that, and there are a lot of people on this webinar, and that is fabulous. We share your commitment and your passion, and we salute you for the work that you're doing, particularly over the last 6 weeks as our world has turned upside down and inside out, and older adults and people with disabilities of all ages have become at so much higher risk than they were before. So I want to make sure that you understand how incredibly awed we are by everything that everyone on this call is doing, our presenters and also everybody else. And I wanted to reiterate that if you would like to share with me what you're doing, what your ideas are, your thoughts for keeping the work going, but not only that, but for enhancing and innovating, even during this crisis, and certainly as we emerge from it over the next few years, I welcome you getting in touch with me. And as my fellow presenters will tell you, I love talking to people about elder rights and elder justice. So I really mean it when I say please be in touch if you'd like to talk. And thank you for joining us today.
I could just add a couple final thoughts. And I don't know if Jessica and Leslie have any. I think it's just as Hillary said, such an important time for partnerships, for us all to be sharing innovations, best practices, how we're working around this crisis to serve older people who are at the epicenter. So to that end, I love that we have an opportunity to connect with others around the country, and NCLR is doing that, ACL is doing that in so many great ways. But I think of all times, it's a time. I think some of our legal services organizations are somewhat fragmented, both from each other and within their states and nationally. And it's a great time for us to try to come together and share more. Again, I think NCLR and ACL are doing a great job of that. I would put a plug in for the American Bar Association's Commission on Law and Aging and their Elder Bar listserv. There's lots of great resources being shared there. I have the privilege of serving on that commission. Also, many of us talked about our statewide senior legal helplines and hotlines, and we have over 30 around the country, so we hope everyone is partnering with them. And they are a wonderful tool to democratize access to justice throughout a particular state. So I also put a plug in for our National Association of Senior Legal Hotlines and Helplines, and we're happy to connect other people with that resource. If you don't have one, we can talk to you about looking to start one and how we're resourcing them. But again, I just think it's such an important time for us as legal services providers for older people to be reaching out and sharing across county and state lines to share what we're doing and how we can learn from each other.
Great. And thank you again to our presenters and all of the participants who joined us this Friday afternoon. The slides will be uploaded to the NLADA webinar page, as well as the recorded webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube, which you can access either through YouTube or our NLADA webinar page. Thank you all again for attending. The contact information for all of the presenters is in one of the earlier slides of the PowerPoint, so feel free to reference that and reach out. And if you have any topics for webinars or resources that you want to share within the legal aid community, feel free to go ahead and send those on over to me, and we can do our best to share them or create webinar topics that you're particularly interested in. All right, so with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful weekend.